Story 1. The Haunted Patrol Car. I've been on the force for over 10 years, and I've seen some things that would make your skin crawl. But nothing prepared me for the night I encountered the haunted patrol car. It was an old cruiser, one that had been decommissioned after a fellow officer, Officer Daniels, had died in it during a routine traffic stop. They said his heart just gave out, but some of us knew there was more to it. One night, I was assigned that very car. I shrugged off the bad vibes. Superstition didn't suit a cop. But as soon as I got in, the air felt heavy, like something was sitting on my chest. I started the engine, and the radio crackled to life on its own, playing Officer Daniels' last transmission. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that recording had been wiped after the investigation. As I drove, I kept catching glimpses of a figure in the rearview mirror, sitting silently in the back seat. My mind raced. I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniels was trying to tell me something. I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe I was just tired. But when I pulled up to the spot where he had died, the car shut off on its own, and the back doors unlocked with a loud click. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted out of that car and refused to drive it again. It's been sitting in the lot ever since, and no one else will touch it either. Story 2. The Crying Woman at the Abandoned House. As a rookie cop, I was eager to prove myself. So when we got a call about a disturbance at an old, abandoned house on the edge of town, I jumped at the chance. The house had a reputation. People said it was haunted, that you could hear a woman crying if you went there at night. I didn't believe in ghosts, so I went in alone. As I walked through the decaying hallways, the sound of sobbing echoed around me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to push forward. The crying grew louder, more desperate, as I reached the basement door. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. What if the rumors were true? I shook off the thought and opened the door. The basement was pitch black, and the crying was now a wail of pure despair. I shone my flashlight around, and in the corner, I saw her, a woman, dressed in white, her face buried in her hands. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. I moved closer, and she suddenly looked up at me, her eyes empty and hollow. I froze, unable to move as she let out a scream that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. I don't remember much after that. My partner found me outside, trembling and pale. I never went back to that house, and to this day, I can still hear her crying in my nightmares. Story 3. The Phantom Hitchhiker. It was a quiet night shift, and I was patrolling a stretch of highway known for its eerie incidents. The locals called it Dead Man's Road, but I always laughed it off. That is, until I saw her, a young woman, standing by the side of the road, her clothes soaked and tattered. I pulled over, and she slowly approached my car. "Need a ride?" I asked, rolling down the window. She nodded, her eyes vacant, like she wasn't really there. I motioned for her to get in, but as she reached for the door handle, she suddenly vanished, just like that, without a trace. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the empty spot where she had been standing. Was I losing my mind? I radioed in the sighting, but the dispatcher told me something that sent chills down my spine. The same woman had been reported by officers for decades, always in the same spot, always disappearing just before getting into the car. I never saw her again, but every time I drive down that road, I can't help but check the rearview mirror, half expecting her to be there, waiting for her ride. Story 4. The Apparition at the Old Jail. I was working the night shift at an old jail that had been converted into a museum. The place was eerie enough in the daylight, but at night, it was downright terrifying. The cells still held the echoes of the criminals who had once been locked up there, and the air was thick with the weight of their suffering. That night, I was doing my rounds when I heard footsteps echoing down the corridor. I called out, thinking it was one of the museum staff, but there was no response. My pulse quickened as the footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned the corner, and there he was, a prisoner in old, tattered clothes, staring straight at me with hollow eyes. I froze, my hand on my gun. "Who are you?" I demanded, but he just stood there, silent and still. I blinked, and he was gone, leaving nothing but an icy chill in the air. I finished my rounds quickly that night, and when I told my colleagues, they just nodded knowingly. The old jail was haunted, they said, and every officer who worked there had seen him at least once. I didn't want to believe it, but after that night, I had no choice. Story 5. The Ghostly Pursuit. It was a typical night shift, cruising through the streets, when I saw a car speeding down a deserted road. I flipped on my lights and gave chase. The car was ancient, like something out of the 1950s, and it moved far too fast for its age. My gut told me something was off, but I was determined to catch the driver. As I closed in, the car suddenly swerved off the road and into the woods. I followed, my adrenaline pumping. The trees closed in around me, and the road grew narrower until it was just a dirt path. Suddenly, the car veered off into a clearing and vanished, just disappeared into thin air. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. I got out and searched the area, but there was nothing. No tire tracks, no signs of the car, nothing. I radioed in, but when backup arrived, they found me alone in the dark woods. They said I must have been chasing a ghost. I laughed it off, but deep down, I knew they were right. Story 6. The Screaming Man on the Bridge. One night, I was called out to an old bridge on the outskirts of town. There had been reports of a man screaming for help. When I arrived, the area was silent, the only sound being the river rushing below. I got out of the car and walked onto the bridge, calling out for the man. Suddenly, I heard it, a blood-curdling scream that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was coming from beneath the bridge. My heart raced as I shined my flashlight down into the darkness. There was nothing there. No man, no signs of anyone in trouble. But the screaming continued, louder and more desperate. I backed away, my instincts telling me to run. I've never felt fear like that before, pure, paralyzing terror. I jumped back into my car and sped off, not stopping until I was miles away from that bridge. I never found out what happened that night, and I'm not sure I want to. But every time I drive by that bridge, I can still hear the echoes of that scream in my mind. Story 7. The Vanishing Figure in the Alley. I was on patrol in a rough part of town, known for its crime and dark alleys. It was around midnight when I saw a man standing at the end of one of those alleys. He was just standing there, completely still, staring at me. Something about him was off. His posture, his silence. It sent a chill down my spine. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I approached cautiously, my hand on my weapon. As I got closer, the man suddenly turned and walked deeper into the alley. I hurried after him, but when I reached the end, the alley was empty. There was no sign of him, no doors he could have entered, no windows to climb through. He was just gone. I reported the incident, and the dispatcher told me that officers had seen that same figure in the same alley for years. He always disappeared the same way, like he was never really there. The locals believed he was the ghost of a man who had been murdered there decades ago. I don't know if I believe that, but I do know that I avoid that alley whenever I can. Story 8. The Possessed Doll in the Evidence Locker. One of the creepiest cases I ever worked involved a series of break-ins at an old house. The owner claimed that her antique doll collection was being tampered with, moved around, and sometimes even posed in strange, unsettling ways. We thought it was just a prankster or a neighbor messing with her, but after several stakeouts, we caught nothing. Then one night, we got a call from her, terrified, saying that one of the dolls had attacked her. We arrived to find her shaking and the doll lying on the floor, its glass eyes staring blankly ahead. We took it in as evidence, thinking it was a joke. The next day, when I was going through the evidence locker, I saw the doll had moved. I was sure of it. 9. The Woman in White. It was a late shift, and I was assigned to patrol the outskirts of town. There's an old road out there that no one likes to drive down. The locals say it's haunted by a woman in white who appears to drivers and then suddenly vanishes, causing accidents. I always thought it was just an urban legend until that night. As I drove down the road, I noticed a figure up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I saw her. A woman in a long, white dress, standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, my heart racing. Something about her was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I pulled over and got out, calling out to her. She didn't respond, just stood there, staring straight ahead. As I approached, she suddenly looked at me, her face twisted with fear and sadness. Then, before I could react, she disappeared right in front of my eyes. I stood there, stunned, for what felt like hours before getting back in my car and driving away as fast as I could. When I reported the incident, the dispatcher wasn't surprised. She told me that others had seen the same woman, always in white, always disappearing without a trace. I don't drive down that road anymore unless I absolutely have to. Story 9. The Unfinished Business. One of the strangest cases I've ever worked involved a man who had been brutally murdered in his home. It was a gruesome scene, and we were determined to catch whoever did it. We didn't have many leads, but one night, I had a dream. Or at least I think it was a dream. In the dream, I was standing in the man's house, looking at the crime scene. The air was cold, and I could see my breath. Suddenly, the victim appeared in front of me. He didn't look like a ghost, more like a person, but I knew he wasn't alive. He pointed to a spot on the floor, then vanished. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a dream. The next day, I went back to the crime scene and looked at the spot where he had pointed. There, hidden under a loose floorboard, was the murder weapon, a knife covered in dried blood. It had the fingerprints of the suspect we'd been looking for. We made the arrest, and the case was closed, but I couldn't stop thinking about that dream. Did the victim really appear to me, or was it just my subconscious putting the pieces together? I'll never know for sure, but I like to think he was trying to help us find justice. Story 10. The Abandoned Asylum. I was new to the force when I got the call, a break-in at the old state asylum, a place that had been abandoned for decades. The locals whispered about it, saying it was haunted, that the spirits of the patients who died there never really left. I didn't believe in ghosts, but as I drove up to the imposing structure, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The asylum loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty, like the eyes of a long-dead corpse. My heart pounded in my chest as I got out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. I could hear the wind howling through the broken windows, carrying with it the faintest sound of whispers, too quiet to make out, but loud enough to set me on edge. I took a deep breath and entered the building, my flashlight barely cutting through the thick darkness that seemed to swallow everything whole. The interior was a mess of broken furniture, peeling paint, and graffiti. But what caught my attention was the graffiti, words scrawled in red paint, almost as if they were written in blood. Get out? Every instinct told me to turn around, but I couldn't. I had to check the place out, had to make sure no one was hurt. The whispers grew louder as I made my way down the long corridor, the air growing colder with each step. My breath formed clouds in front of me, and I could see my hands shaking, though I told myself it was just the cold. The whispers became more distinct, like a chorus of voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, filling my mind with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I tried to focus, tried to keep my thoughts clear, but it was like the asylum was trying to pull me into its madness. I turned a corner and found myself in what used to be the treatment wing. The walls were lined with rusted metal beds, each one with restraints that were now frayed and decayed. The whispers grew into a cacophony, almost deafening, as if the voices were screaming in my ears. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into complete darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled with it, trying to get it to turn back on. But before I could, I felt it, a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy. I froze, too terrified to move, my mind screaming at me to run, but my body refusing to obey. The hand tightened its grip, and I heard a voice, clear, distinct, and filled with pain. "Why did you leave us?" it asked, the sound echoing in the darkness. "Why didn't you save us?" I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The voice was filled with so much sorrow, so much despair, that it felt like it was crushing my soul. The hand released me, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall behind me. My flashlight flickered back to life, revealing nothing but empty beds and peeling paint. But the voice was still there, lingering in my mind, repeating the same question over and over again. I ran, not caring where I was going, just desperate to get out of that place. When I finally burst through the front doors and into the night air, I collapsed, gasping for breath. I looked back at the asylum, its dark silhouette towering over me, and I knew that I had just experienced something far beyond my understanding. The case was closed as a false alarm, but I never spoke about what happened inside those walls. Some things are better left forgotten. Last story. The Watcher in Pine Hollow. There's a certain stillness in the woods that can play tricks on your mind. The kind that makes every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, feel like an impending threat. I learned this the hard way during one of the most unsettling nights of my career. It was late fall, and the chill in the air carried a sense of foreboding that I couldn't shake off. I was called out to Pine Hollow, a dense, sprawling forest just outside of town, to search for a missing hiker. Pine Hollow wasn't your typical hiking spot. It was known for its labyrinthine trails and its eerie atmosphere, a place where even seasoned hikers occasionally got turned around. The hiker, a young woman in her early 20s, had been missing for over 24 hours, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew our window for finding her was shrinking fast. I parked my cruiser at the trailhead, the sky now an inky black, with only a sliver of moonlight filtering through the canopy of pine trees. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. As I started down the trail, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't the typical unease that comes from being alone in the woods. It was something more primal, like the forest itself was alive and aware of my presence. I tried to dismiss it as nerves, but the feeling only grew stronger the further I went. About an hour into my search, I heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush, followed by the distinct snap of a twig. I stopped in my tracks, my hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm at my hip. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area with my flashlight, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "Hello?" I called out, hoping against hope that it was the missing hiker, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. There was no response, only that suffocating silence. I pressed on, the trail becoming more overgrown and difficult to navigate. The temperature seemed to drop the deeper I went, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. I tried to stay focused, but the feeling of being watched had become almost unbearable, like a weight pressing down on my chest. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a flash of white darting between the trees. My pulse quickened as I turned my flashlight in that direction, but whatever it was had already disappeared into the shadows. I was certain it wasn't an animal. It moved too fast, too deliberately. "Come out where I can see you," I shouted, but again, there was no reply. I stood there, straining to hear any sound, any sign of life, but the forest remained eerily silent. As I continued, I started to notice other things, subtle, almost imperceptible signs that I wasn't alone. The occasional scuff mark on the trail, a broken branch here and there, all pointing to the fact that someone, or something, had been moving through the woods. And it was clear they didn't want to be found. My nerves were on edge, my thoughts racing. Who could be out here, stalking me through the trees? Was it the hiker, lost and delirious? Or was it someone else? Someone who didn't want me to find her? After what felt like hours, I reached a small clearing, the moonlight finally breaking through the canopy to cast long, eerie shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing was an old, weathered cabin, half hidden by overgrown bushes and vines. It wasn't on any map, and I knew it shouldn't be there. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't leave without checking it out. I had to know if the hiker was inside. As I approached the cabin, the feeling of being watched intensified, so much so that it felt like a physical presence looming over me. My flashlight flickered as I stepped onto the porch, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the doorway, just beyond the reach of the light. I froze, my hand tightening around the grip of my gun. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. I pushed the door open with my flashlight, the hinges groaning in protest. The inside of the cabin was dark, the air thick with dust and decay. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping across the room. The cabin was empty, save for a few broken pieces of furniture and a fireplace long since gone cold. But there, in the corner of the room, was something that made my blood run cold. Scratch marks, deep and jagged, gouged into the wood of the wall. They were fresh. I didn't wait to find out what made them. I backed out of the cabin, my heart hammering in my chest, and as I did, I heard it again. The rustling in the underbrush, closer this time, and more deliberate. I turned and ran, my flashlight bobbing wildly as I tore through the trees, branches whipping at my face and arms. The sound of footsteps followed me, matching my pace, always just out of sight. No matter how fast I ran, they were right there, stalking me, driving me deeper into the woods. By the time I reached the trailhead, I was gasping for breath, my clothes torn, my nerves frayed. I jumped into my cruiser and sped away, not daring to look back. The missing hiker was never found, and to this day, I can't explain what happened in those woods. But I'll never forget that feeling, that primal, gut-wrenching terror of being hunted by something unseen, something that knew those woods far better than I ever could. I haven't been back to Pine Hollow since, and I don't plan on it. Some places are meant to stay hidden, and some things are better left unfound. These stories serve as a reminder that even the bravest among us, the ones who face danger daily, can encounter things that defy explanation. Each of these officers was pushed to the limits of their beliefs, confronted with the unknown in a way that left them forever changed. Their experiences are a chilling reminder that sometimes it's not just the criminals we need to be afraid of, but the lingering spirits and unresolved mysteries that haunt the dark corners of our world. If these stories gave you goosebumps, you're not alone. But now it's your turn. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? Share your own scary stories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more hair-raising tales from the world of law enforcement. You never know what might be lurking in the shadows.